We're live. Good morning.
We are live. G'day, how are you?
I'm very happy to be here. I'm very happy to be back in the office. How about you?
Yeah, couldn't be happy to be back in the office. We just both shoveled down our breakfast. We got a bit distracted, didn't we?
A little bit, but it's okay.
Feeling a little bit.
So you see me disappear from the screen briefly. It's probably because breakfast is coming up because we probably went a little bit too fast with that. But I got to say, second webinar in, and yeah, it's been an eventful week.
Hasn't it? I was just thinking, Tet, I gave you the red purse for Tet. And then
that's meant to be good luck. I don't know what happened.
And then you had a shit week. Both kids sick.
Breathe. Okay.
All our clients in hospitality and Valentine's Day.
Yeah.
Oh, God, that was
a tough time. It was a tough time for everyone. But a couple of good things that did come out of it. Thankfully for us, the fact that we could switch to remote work quickly was not an issue at all.
Yeah, it was magical, wasn't it?
So we're quite well conditioned for that. So that was great. But I don't know. I reckon this is going to happen again.
Look, I think so. One of the things that I was interested in, I was at the gym this morning. I'm just boasting about that. And
does that mean he did anything? He's just one of these guys.
Personal trainer. Like I did something, I was thrashed. But he was talking about accountants not wanting to come back to work, and it's a constant theme from our clients who are accountants. And they have a problem that they ring and their staff don't actually respond, and they respond the next day. And I was just thinking, our rules are quite different, which is if I ring you, we're in lockdown or you're working from home, I'll always ring you in FaceTime. It's not a lack of trust, but I'll see you.
Yeah.
And I'll see you, and I know I'll see you. So there's a level of professionalism that comes around that. And if I'm ringing you and you can't talk to me, you have to send me a message. So people just can't disappear. Equally, Rob, who's our CEO, said to me, I'm not going to be available between 11 and 1. I'm going surfing. I'm actually fine with that because it's outcome.
Yep.
But there's a whole lot of people who just let it drift and forget this whole thing that people actually have contracts of employment that require them to come to work. And you said this morning, quite rightly, as we were running across to get breakfast, we were running across to get breakfast.
It should build up an appetite. Because you didn't do much of personal training.
Well, you had personal training.
I know. I actually did something.
Well, you weren't at mine. Okay. You were doing kettlebells. I was doing real weights. Okay, but anyway.
All right.
But people let this drift for long enough, they're going to get stuck with the Cosmo and Qantas issue that their contract will be waived, and that it will be lawful for people to say, no, I am working from home.
Yep, this is my job.
Yeah. So, I think there's some problems coming people's way who just won't address the issue, which is we must be contactable. And the way we do it is by actually being able to see each other when we work remotely, whether that's in lockdown the whole time or whether that's just our normal flexible work. We talk to each other. We look at each other. And if you don't want to work with them, your team knows that.
Yeah. Well, that's our normal.
Yeah.
The thing is that what are other organisations doing? What's their normal? And maybe their normal is not exactly what they want it to be. And this is the opportunity to really correct that.
Now I'm getting the evil eye from Sophie, who's our producer. And Sophie said it's now time to start. So look, what we're going to do today is a couple of things. We're going to look at a couple of really interesting cases. One, picking up the theme of COVID we've just been chatting about and how you actually do consultation around redundancies or any other major change in your organisation. We're going to look at the problems that exist when people are injured outside of work and they come back to work, and how coming back to work can actually create workers' comp issues, which people keep forgetting about. We're going to go back to vaccination again. You've given us a whole lot of questions, so we're going to answer all those questions that you gave last week, as we promised. We'll talk briefly about the IR Omnibus Bill, really just to tell you what is an update from last week. So that's what we're going to do. So look, let's get straight into it. And I think the thing for us really is to talk about the first case, which is Sposito and Maori Chief Hotel. Really interesting case, like this was a hotel that really struggled during COVID, and it decided it was going to make people redundant. And it did that in a pretty capricious way by really not communicating with people other than to tell them they were redundant. And it used as an excuse. Well, look, we're in COVID, we really can't communicate. And the Fair Work Commission said, well, actually, people are much more vulnerable during COVID than any other time. There is a whole lot of methods by which you can communicate, and the consultation obligations that exist under award say you must, once you've made a decision, identify what is the nature of the decision. You must communicate it with the people, and in some cases, their representatives. You must provide them with an opportunity to respond, and you must actively look at ways of mitigating and managing the impact upon people. And actually just sending them a text saying you're fired doesn't actually cut it. It's a problem though, isn't it, Karen?
Yeah, it is a problem because the problem is that it was such a simple issue that it didn't have to occur. I mean, they had a valid reason. Like, surely the business was doing really unwell. All that was really clear, but just a pure failure of just sticking to your obligations in terms of communicating. Like, it just astounds me. I'm still kind of like, when I read it,
I think the thing that surprises me out of this case is more that I know it's difficult having what are called difficult conversations. And you know I don't like that phrase because to me they're just accountability conversations. They're what you're meant to do. Your business is struggling a little bit and you've got to tell somebody some news which is about to change their life.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now your own moral code tells you at that stage, gee, I'm going to be careful with this conversation. And then someone says, well, why don't I send a text telling them they're fired?
You and I have been in those situations plenty of times before where we had to have those conversations. There's a reason why you need to have them in person, and you couldn't do it in person for this, during this time. But certainly Zoom calls, like FaceTimes, like phone conversation, anything would have been better than a text.
That's right.
Surely. And
the other part is, and this came out in Commission and Business decision in the Deakin University, a decision which I'd just be clear, I think is a rubbish decision, but nonetheless, one of the things that she said, and there's a lot of stuff she said I don't actually agree with, but one of the things she did say is, if you don't speak to people, you can't find opportunities.
Mm.
And it is true, in chatting to somebody, look, the Maori hotel was gone, it was gone. And maybe there was nothing they could have said which would have changed that. But at the end of the day, even if they couldn't have done that, they would have at least been given the respect of being able to say, look, is there anything I can do for you? I'm happy to help you even clean up for a couple of weeks. There may have been bits and pieces of this, but when we hurt people, and we'd hurt people when we terminate them, just be clear about it, we hurt them. You never hurt a family member like that. And these people have families, they have responsibilities, they have financial responsibilities. We're about to change someone's life. And I think the reason the award spells out what you've got to do is those reasons. But as leaders in our own business, imagine they're only closing part of the hotel. What are you saying to the people who are left behind when you behave like that? That's the real news. The news is, where's your value system that tells people who stay behind what good behaviour looks like?
We've said it before, doing the right thing is doing the right thing.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Look, the next case I want to talk about is Nguyen in the state of New South Wales. An incredibly sad case. It's about the New South Wales Police Force, which is often a very sad case. Young woman went to a hotel out of work. It was a work sort of related function. At that stage, she was sexually assaulted and subsequently raped by a member of the police force who was a colleague. It was deemed, as far as workers' compensation law in New South Wales, as a non-work activity, therefore it was not compensable. Okay, and that's because she wasn't invited to it. In Victoria, I've got to tell you, claim more than likely would have been accepted, and similarly would have definitely been accepted in South Australia. So forget that for a moment. It's just an awful beginning to what occurred next. When she came back, she wanted to come back and work at the police station, not the police station, the office that she was working in. And they decided they were going to move her to protect her to an office which was really a dumping ground for other people who were on workers' compensation. And she brought a workers' comp claim. And she was successful in it. And the real heart of this is, when people are injured and they come back to work, whether it's workers' compensation or not, how you treat them in the immediate aftermath of that, how you respect them, how you ensure that has workers' compensation, discrimination, adverse action, has a whole lot of liability that sits there. But most people think when someone comes back and then don't come back from a compensable injury, I can just treat them like they're a normal worker. And this is an incredibly good case, tough jurisdiction, really to succeed in, where they succeeded. And the court said, well, no, what you actually did was place stress sufficient for her to have a psychological injury by what you did. Therefore, it is compensable because it happened at work. Let's just drag that out a bit further. Imagine, as a result of doing that, she, in a disorientated state, walked across the road and was run over, or she did something that hurt herself and eventually died as a result. Well, in Victoria, that would fall under the industrial manslaughter, and you'd be liable and people would be going to jail. But Karen, for you and I, this is the issue about how do we treat injured people at work, isn't it?
Yep. So for a long time, how I've seen it in practice is that if it's work related, then it's our issue. But if it's not, then we want nothing to do with it.
Yeah. And the difficulty is employees are not dumb. They understand the reason you're interested in work is not so much the work you're doing, it's the cost to the business. And if people start to realize they're a cost center, then they're not going to rehabilitate well. But it's worse still when they go, oh, I'm injured away from work and they just don't care about me. So I think this is a really good case, because I think what it does is it brings back to this issue, try and treat people when they're injured, however they're injured, the same. A, you'll get better productivity every time. B, you'll stop that focus on people with workers' compensation, feeling that you're treating them this way. You're punishing them, actually, by your constant attendance and checking their return to work, because it's a cost to the business, not because you care about them. And the third part about it is, how do we keep talent in business? We respect people.
So just for employers, what is it, where does action need to be taken? Because as a frontline manager or a manager generally, like where does that work start? Is that at a policy level? Is that there's going to be a shift somewhere? Where does that need to occur? Because I don't see that being an operational thing.
Yeah, no, and I wish you had told me that when we were having breakfast, because it's quite a hard question.
Oh, sorry, I was busy eating.
Yeah, I know, I've still got something on me. But I think the answer is a real leadership issue, which is a decision around, at a leadership level, we don't want you to be injured, but if you're injured or ill, however that arises, we're going to treat you as if you're under the workers' comp regime. In other words, we're going to bring you back, and it may not always be to your job, but we're going to bring you back in a respectful way to try and get the best out of you and to support you. When you break them up, you start to see growth in premium. So all those rogues who go into workers' compensation and crush premium by intensively managing people. Yeah, that's great. Your premium drops like that for the first year, but then gradually balloons out and never comes back, and you spend a fortune getting there. We just have to understand that when people are ill or injured, they actually see the world very differently. They're vulnerable. They feel scared about being at work. They feel like they're letting work colleagues down. For every one rogue who misuses the workers' comp system, there's 10,000 people who are good people who want to get back to work. But once you've been away from work, and think about it, when you've been sick at home and things like that, it's actually quite hard to get back into the workplace. And when the nature of your illness or injury, particularly a psychological injury, means actually you can't do what you were doing before. You want to do it, but you're incredibly vulnerable about your failure to be able to do it. How an employer behaves towards that person is the difference between productivity and success and chronic illness and damage to the business and the person. It's about attitude. So I think it comes at leadership. And then I think it goes to training. And ultimately, I don't think it's a helpful policy to have, because people are going to litigate on the policy rather than drive good behaviour. So I think it's really values-driven behaviour and a clear commitment from leadership. We'll treat whatever injury or illness occurs, wherever it occurs, exactly the same. Okay. And then you get all the great skills out of the workers' comp employee who knows exactly what to do, but only deals with people when they're broken. All right. Well, look, let's move on a little bit. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about
a message there from Kate.
Oh, g'day, Kate. It's like we're fearful about people's privacy, but managing the whole. Yeah, no, you're right, Kate. It is. We keep thinking we shouldn't intrude on what's something that's private to somebody, but the actual privacy law is very straightforward. Privacy law basically says if the nature of your illness or injury affects the inherent requirements of the business, privacy law doesn't apply. So you're allowed to ask those questions. You're allowed to treat someone differently, and privacy law and safety law will stop a discrimination claim coming every single time, because what you're doing is you're complying with the safety law to do everything that's reasonably practical to provide a safe place of work and to monitor a person's health. So thanks, Kate. That's a really good point. IR Omnibus Bill. What can I say about that other than it's a crock? I've sent you out a very detailed analysis of it and its likelihood of passing. And you remember last time I said the crazy stuff they're doing around boot tests was never ever going to work. And the idea of their boot test was allow for a 2-year window because of COVID for you to put up applications for enterprise agreements which were beneath the better off overall test. Even the dumbest people on the crossbench, and there are some incredibly stupid people on the crossbench who can barely walk and talk, even they realise that unscrupulous employers would misuse it. And if they can understand it, it's surprising that Morrison couldn't see it coming. Because what it's done is it's tarnished the bill. There are some really good bits and pieces in the bill. And Porter, who's the head in the government of it, said this week, yeah, we're going to abandon that. Well, why didn't he actually abandon the boot test and look at no disadvantage test, which is every IR practitioner, every employer is trying to say it is too complex to get an enterprise agreement up. I mean, we have waiting times at the moment of 6 to 12 months after we've got everyone to agree to it, and that's because the boot test is almost impossible to meet, and the case law says anything that falls underneath the boot test, so there's no balancing out, means you lose. So other than that, it's proceeding. There is still huge dispute around parts of it. I hope the document we've sent out to you, and if you haven't got it, please ask, we'll send it out for you again, goes through what it is now, what it's going to be in the future, and the likelihood of getting through. The other issue, which I think is not a particularly clever argument, is around the issue of casuals, and the government's argument is, if I call you, you're a casual, you're a casual. That's sort of disappearing into the Dumb and Dumber land, because it clearly breaches ILO conventions, which are the base of the Fair Work Act. It clearly breaches Australia's sense of fairness. I don't think there's too many Australians who are that happy about the fact that casual employees missed out on JobKeeper, and they represent, around about a third of our working community. So these people were impoverished during a time when others weren't. Pretty bad behaviour, as people don't get that Australians are underemployed. So we look at our employment rate, which was changed by Keating to hide the difficulties around the Banana Republic time when he was really having bad unemployment. And he made unemployment a figure that measured people who were completely unemployed. But the actual underemployed part of the Australian economy is massive. And that means people like Karen and I, well, not Karen and I, but lots of families have people who do two jobs. They do their full-time job, but then they go and do their casual job. And that casual job, of course, if it's done for a long period of time with a reasonable expectation of continuing employment, at common law becomes a permanent job, and so it should. What the Omnibus doesn't deal with is, industrially, we've always known that under awards, if you're a casual under the award, there can be a long-term casual. And there's a benefit that comes with it because you get a casual loading. And what the cases of Risotto and Skeen said, yeah, but that 25% after a period of years is not a sufficient amount of money to meet what a permanent employee would have. So that's the case that's presently before the High Court. That's what was meant to be solved by the IR Omnibus Bill, not to go and rip away all protections from casuals. Was actually to increase the level of protection, but to acknowledge the casual nature of employment is growing in Australia and growth in the gig economy, and to actually address the issue like Andrews did in Victoria, to start doing an inquiry into, well, how big is this gig economy being? And if you look at Andrews' report, we're getting closer to Singapore. Singapore, 30% of all labour coming up is gig-based. And that was 2 years ago. So I suspect it's much higher. You've been recruiting for HR jobs. In Singapore, a gig group would put in an offer and say, look, we can offer that. There's 3 of us. We're really highly skilled. We've got these 3 skills. You want to direct it, but we can do it for the same price. So, the world's moving a lot faster. I think it's really exciting. But the Omnibus Bill goes back to that old industrial cleavage that sits between capital and labour. And it's dumb. And Australia's struggling with it because it does do dumb stuff. Anyway, look, I won't bag the bill anymore. You can see I think it's pretty unimpressive, and I think it's another political compromise between 2 parties who just don't get IR and what business they do. So,
well, there's a great article on our website summarising it in terms of how you would be affected, if you're affected, and how you'd be affected. So.
Yeah, good. Yeah, okay, well, look, let's move on. We're going to move on to vaccinations, Soph. There you go. You asked a series of questions last week, and we promised we'd answer them. So let me shoot through the questions that you've got and answer them very quickly. How do I manage leave associated with the vaccination program? I think the short answer is, if people have any symptoms arising, which is quite common after vaccination, then they just have their personal leave. Other than that, there is no other leave entitlement that sits around vaccination. You get vaccinated because you're required to by your business, if that's what we're talking about. if you suffer symptoms that come in the aftermath, that you get personal leave for it. I think that's it. If I'm wrong about the question, let me know and I'll come back to you. What about managing employees who want to be vaccinated by their own doctor rather than part of an organisation rollout? I think that's just part of your policy. That's absolutely fine. As long as they can produce a certificate of vaccination, proof of vaccination, I'm fine. One of the issues that is, I think, will be more controversial very shortly is there are two vaccines with two different levels of efficacy. I'm not sure what organisers think about it. One has 94%, one has 66%. The 94% possibly means, we don't know completely yet, if I get that one, I probably can't infect Karen. If I get the 66%, I probably can infect Karen. So I think I know I'm making this more complicated. I think the bottom line is it doesn't matter how you vaccinate as long as everyone's vaccinated. Because it doesn't matter if that makes sense. But if you've got people who are opting out of vaccination, you're doing 66%, your obligations under safety law are really clear, which you've got to exercise, do everything that's reasonably practical to prevent injury to them. And here they are being a person on a 66% vaccination, where I can definitely cause them a problem. Anyway, that's a different issue. Should I include it as a condition of employment? So two different things. I wouldn't make it as a policy. I think, remember, policies we try to exclude from contracts of employment. I would make it definitely part of reasonable medical directions under the contract of employment. And then I would have a policy that sits over for the people who don't have that in their contracts of employment going forward, that this is the policy of the organisation, it's a lawful and reasonable direction.
That's a new clause, medical direction.
We've got them in our contracts for a number of industries which you will undertake such medical examination as required. I think for childcare centres, a number of others, we've upped those to say you will be vaccinated as required for communicable diseases that could affect the children and carers. So think about that. I think it's a good idea. What's the eligibility for compensation and liability? I think I said last week, it's absolute. So both at common law and workers' compensation, I don't doubt at all. There's at the moment, it's not a disease for which there is a compensable outcome. Okay. And that's just an oddity that exists through the legislation, which is inclined to list diseases. But quite clearly, if you become ill as a result of an action, it doesn't matter whether it's a listed disease or not, it will be compensable. And of course, at common law, you can imagine, we've seen some of the very serious effects of people who have suffered COVID and come away in shocking conditions. If it's your negligence, so let's talk about what negligence is. It has three parts to negligence. Do I have a duty of care to someone to prevent injury or illness? Yes, I do. Is that person somebody who would be subject to the duty? They're an employee, so I have a complete duty about it. So it's not too remote. Could my negligence cause damage to the person? Yes, it could. Therefore, negligence as a concept, because they're the three elements of negligence, means that is negligence. So if I say, look, I'm not going to enforce vaccination, and that, by the way, I'm not saying you have to do that, because you've got to look at the level of risk you have in your organisation. But if what you say, I'm a meatworks and I allow someone to be non-vaccinated, yeah, they can bring a common law claim without a doubt. Absolutely no doubt. The implications of allowing allergy sufferers not to be vaccinated. Look, because I'm not medically trained up, I'm not quite sure to the extent to which vaccination and allergy goes. All I can say to you is this: if a person has a medical reason not to be vaccinated, the issue is, would they be fit for the inherent requirements of their job? Because the inherent requirements of their job require them to work safely. And if we can't provide a reasonable control, and let me give you an example. My wife's mum is in a aged care home. And when her mum got a cold, they closed the door to her room and you had to use high PPE to go in and out, okay? Well, is that level of control something that we can have in a sales-based position? You're wandering, you're wandering around the world with two layers of PPE. And Margaret, what have you said? Would it be appropriate to ask for a medical certificate? I think we'd do more than ask for a medical certificate. Yeah, I think we'd actually ask for some medical advice rather than just a certificate, because there's a range of cases, Margaret, that say that a certificate is often not sufficient, that we're entitled to go back to a doctor and say, look, got your certificate, but what does it mean? What do you mean this person can't do it? Because there's lots of people, it could be I don't like it, and it will create emotionally I'd struggle with it. Well, you know, there's unfortunately too many doctors who will give certificates of that nature, but then create risk for the person and not understand the risk we're giving them. So we can go back. Yes, we should get some doctor's advice, but I'd be asking from a letter from the doctor explaining what the nature of the illness is so that we can actually verify it. Okay, that's me. And the law says I'm okay doing that. Unions will say I'm not such a good guy, but the bottom line is there's no doubt at all that the law says in those types of grey areas, we're entitled to have the knowledge we need to verify whether it's true. Safe Work is saying that because the COVID plan is deemed to be a tool, effectively, just sorry, Kate, I'll get. So Kate said Safe Work is saying because the COVID plan is deemed to be a tool to effectively manage COVID risk at your workplace, and as a vaccination is currently not a direction by the government to the business, that vaccination is not something that can necessarily be directed at this stage. Well, I think they're just wrong. Yeah, I think that's rubbish. We all know that a COVID safe plan is not a 100% method of protecting people from suffering from the illness. Yeah, well done, Kate. You and I are on the same page. And we know from the most recent lockdown in Victoria, the ability to be infected with these two new strains is much higher. So as with all safety, we try and be as safe as we can. But the bottom line is if you're in the meat industry, you'd be requiring vaccination because you cannot provide those conditions. The requirement for a specific COVID vaccination policy, I've already addressed that one. Let's go on to our problem because we're running late because I've been garrulous today. All right, so June was employed as a sales manager. And this answers a question from last week, by the way. Asia Pac for Toweling Tops Australia Proprietary Limited. She earns $220,000 a year before commissions. She previously travelled monthly for major clients for a week throughout Asia. Asian clients mostly are based on relationship and margin. For those of you who deal in the Asian market, you know that's true. That is a relationship grounded on physically meeting people. June is concerned by the less than 100% efficacy rate of vaccines and rapid rollout. She's over 60, has some secondary morbidity, including diabetes and asthma. Sales have dropped, but it's hard to say whether it's COVID, collapse in Asian economies, her absence, or a mixture of one or more. Her contract clearly states she needs to travel to work where reasonably required. She's been using Microsoft Teams and believes that's the best way to overcome the risk, so she doesn't have to travel. The business is aware that 3 of the top 5 clients have gone to other local suppliers. It's now 1 November 2021, the federal government saying we can fly to Asia. So that's the date. June refuses to be vaccinated and travel, even though she's been directed to do it. Now, I said that very fast, so let's put up the poll questions. Sophie, or is it us putting up poll questions?
I'll launch it.
It's not Sophie, it was us. Sorry about that. All right, I think we'll give 10 more seconds.
Okay, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Thank you very much.
All right, so I'm going to answer 2 rather than 1. So yes, it is part of her inherent requirements to travel because it's in a contract, okay? Her contract, she is a common law employee. She's over 154,300, so she's outside of award coverage. Therefore, the contract is what governs it, so it is definitely part of her job to travel. So the next question is TTO's direction a lawful and reasonable direction? And interesting, 1 and 3, and you're right, the 2 groups, both, you got this absolutely right. There's no clarity because what we don't have is the evidence. We don't actually know whether it's her inability to travel that's causing the loss of clients, although if it was my business, I'd be saying it's pretty clear, given the market that you're working in, it is the personal nature relationship, and it's a pretty clear chain of causation as to why other people are stealing that because they're actually being present. So this is a pretty hard conversation, but she doesn't have a medical reason to refuse, so she's in strife. Her feeling is, look, it's not 100% safe. I don't feel safe. Well, that's actually bad luck. She's able to travel. She's been taught how to manage that through your safety system. I think it's a lawful and reasonable direction. But I totally agree with the bottom line is, can you summarily terminate? And the answer is, no, you can't. You'd have to set up a warning process. But once you set up a simple one, only because she's a common law person, you'd only have to do one, but you'd have to do it because the risk of her raising a protected attribute later on, you know, same with the diabetes and these things, you're treating me adversely because of the morbidity that I've got. You'd have to set it up. You may even have to do a medical assessment to get through it. Okay, very good. But I do think she may not be able to do a role, and that's a slightly different issue, which is not terminated for failing to do this, but failing to fulfill the inherent requirement of a job. I think at the end of the day would be something you could do if she really pushed ahead with it. Okay, we're going on to the very last page. I want to tell you about next week very quickly. We're doing the big challenges of 2021 next year, the 5 biggest risks and how to manage them. And I can tell you now, I haven't thought of what they are. But I'm sitting next to Karen, who keeps telling me what those risks are every minute of the day. So we will have them for you next week. And not only that, we'll have a bit of a commentary out to you by next Wednesday to actually promote that discussion, because what we want to do is try and predict what it looks like in the future, like we do every year at the start of the year, allow you to provision for that, both in human capital and money, and also to look at what is the skill transfer you need to actually manage that. And obviously, COVID's a continuing problem all year, and we'll deal with that as one problem. But I think we're already seeing the major problem is how do we manage flexible work. That is overwhelmingly the problem, and the lack of courage in employers to actually address it in a meaningful way means that problem's going to boom in around about June, July.
Yep, when winter hits.
And winter hits, and we start getting people getting crook, getting niggles, doing all that sort of stuff. So I think there's some really interesting issues. I think the other part that we're dealing with, which I'm dealing with, which is travel. I'm meant to be in 3 different states next week, of which only one I can travel to at the moment. We've got a whole lot of stuff about how we realign our workforce to manage this continual state of COVID that's going to be going for a whole year. So I think they're 3 of the issues, but I want to look at some of the industrial issues coming up.
Yep.
And I particularly want to look at managing some health-related issues, because the data coming out around mental health is really alarming. And what we're seeing throughout the world is a massive spike in mental health issues as a result of COVID. So I know COVID's one issue, but the flow on from COVID, the economic impact of it, the family impact, the lack of casual work, all those things is creating...
It's just not preparedness in terms of your COVID management. It's the preparedness in terms of how to manage the other issues that arise from COVID.
Yeah. Now, from 2 dogs from Tet.
From
one dog to another. So it's Lunar New Year.
Lunar New Year still.
Still. Yeah.
Not a great Lunar New Year.
And Monica, what are we saying? Thank you for the brief date. Yeah, look, lovely to see you there, Monica. And we're going to shoot. Okay?
See you, everyone.
See you later.
next week.
Bye-bye, Lydia.
Bye now.
Bye-bye. Bye, Matt.